Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. Is there anyone online or in the room who's new or returning from a long absence? If you could just say hello so we can welcome you. Hi, what's your name?
Nid.
Nick?
Nid.
Nid. Hi, Nid. Nice to meet you. Welcome. Good to see you. It's our custom to just go around the room and say our names. So we'll start in the room and then I'll go through and say everyone's name on Zoom. So I'm Grisha.
My name is Cass.
I'm Mike.
I'm Tony.
My name is Jared.
My name is Stephen.
Bob.
I'm Nid. I'm Brad.
My name is Mark.
My name is Sal.
Welcome everybody in the room. And then on Zoom we have about 22 folks. So just going along here, Christian, Bob, Chris, Tom, Sean, Tom, Hart, that is, George, Richard, Henry, Kai, Harley, Daniel, Jim, John, Joe, Frisco, Richard, Charles, Michael, Charles Lee, and Tom. Welcome everyone. Nice big crowd. And I will introduce our teacher for today. Sean Feit Oakes teaches Buddhism and somatic practice, focusing on the integration of meditation, trauma resolution, and social justice. He received teaching authorization from Jack Kornfield and wrote his dissertation on extraordinary states in Buddhist meditation and experimental dance. He teaches with Spirit Rock Meditation Center, East Bay Meditation Center, Insight Timer, and elsewhere. So welcome. Thank you.
Right on. Thank you so much, Grisha. Good to see everybody. Good to see a few familiar faces and some new ones. Hi to folks in the room and elsewhere. I'm elsewhere. I'm up in western Sonoma County. This is the ancestral lands of the southern Pomo people. And it's been maybe a year or something since I've been with this group, so it's really lovely to be back. I'm glad that there's some gathering back in physical space together. I know that was missed. And just my blessings to those of you, in the space. And I miss the mission and I miss being able to come into physical space with folks. So blessings to you. And blessings to everyone gathering from everywhere. I've been gently requested, encouraged, asked if I might speak on a Buddhist teaching known as the 8 Worldly Winds. And it's a beautiful teaching. It's a beautiful list to keep in mind. It's a little bit stern but encouraging, I think, in terms of how we make our way through a complicated world. So I'm going to speak on that a little bit, and then we'll have some space for a discussion, Q&A, reflections. This teaching, known as the 8 Worldly Winds, also known as 8 Worldly Conditions, goes back to the earliest teachings of the Buddha in the Pali Canon. That's the collection of discourses or texts preserved by the Theravada school of Buddhism in Sri Lanka and throughout Southeast Asia. It's my primary lineage. And the teaching, in a certain way, is very pragmatic. So the Buddha says to his practitioners at one point, he says, there are these 8 conditions or winds, metaphorically, that blow through the world, that move the world. And these 8 are gain and loss, pleasure and pain, praise and blame, and fame and disrepute. So there are 4 sets of 2, right, that you can tell, opposites. So gain and loss. largely, I take gain and loss very plainly to be talking about material gain and loss. You get a little bit wealthy, you get a little bit unwealthy. Material comforts come and go in this life and are fundamentally unreliable. At one point, many years ago in San Francisco, I was making my living as an itinerant piano teacher, and I had a student who lived up in North Beach. I would bike around town. I lived in the Mission, 21st in Alabama, for those of you who are in town there. And so I biked up to my student's house, and this student was a banker with the investment company Bear Stearns. Some of you might remember that name from back in the day. And he was my student at the very moment of the great crash. And so I went over. I had seen the news, of course, and I saw that this company Bear Stearns had essentially imploded overnight. And so I sent my student a message. I was like, I know there's some drama in your world. Do you want me to come for your piano lesson? And he wrote back, a very glum, like, yeah, you might as well. So I went over and I saw him and I was like, hey man, how are you? He was really he was a dude, rode a big Harley, but a softie, as because those two things are not incompatible. And I was like, hey man, like, how's it going? And he was like, well, I lost $2.5 million in 1 hour last night. And I was like, and I restrained all of my, class war rhetoric. And because, I was like, I'm so sorry, dude. What I didn't say was like, how much do you have left? But, gain and loss, like things could fluctuate quite widely. And we all know this, right? This is in a certain way obvious, but it's worth really, really taking in. And of course, we can take gain and loss also to mean, subtler things, particularly like in relationship, right? New friends, new connections, new lovers, new community, new, even, deep connections like family and, really, the things that we might gain in this life that are subtle and profound, and love is, a beautiful thing to be gained and can be lost, and so the loss of relationship, the loss of connection is also very much a part of the world of being in relationships. So gain and loss, pleasure and pain, I'm going to speak just briefly about here. In a certain way, it's the core of the whole thing. But certainly beings with bodies, pleasurable sense experiences come and go, right? Again, obvious, but if we really got it, this is the hinge to the entire unraveling of attachment and opening of the door to liberation. So it's worth taking in that this might be a deeper teaching than it initially seems. But certainly sometimes pleasurable sensory experiences are available, right? The body's comfortable, the body's not in pain. There are beautiful sensual experiences in this bodily life, right? Sometimes we have a meal and the food is tremendous, so good. And that experience of just like, oh my God, this is so good. Or you get into a situation and it's like some glorious moment in nature where things are so beautiful, or a glorious moment with people where some body is so beautiful and you're like, you're so beautiful. Or this situation is so beautiful. And of course the deep sensual experiences that are gorgeous, right? Coming through all of our senses. And that's part of human life, praise be. One of the extraordinary things about being in this human condition is that sensual pleasure is possible. And it happens sometimes, even for folks in the most dire circumstances, pleasures happen. And then of course it's opposite, completely undeniable, but painful things happen, physical pain deep pain in the emotional and heart realm. The world is painful, and there's oppression and injustice and suffering and torture and all of the terrible, terrible things that are just real. And so pain is real. So pleasure and pain, totally real. They come and go. You might already get the sense with this list that, of where it's headed, right? That we're headed in a certain way toward non-attachment, toward equanimity, toward letting go. But let's not get there too quickly. The next two are really social. So I think one of the things I love about this list is that there's really an acknowledgement that the world of relationship is profoundly important to us as tribal beings, human beings, pack beings. So there's praise and blame, right? Other people say things that are positive about you, things that are negative. There's no way to escape this, right? There's no perfect performance of yourself in social space that will forever evade blame and forever attract praise. It's impossible, right? Some people like what you are doing, and some people do not like what you are doing. And even if you hide yourself away in a bubble in the most protected circumstances possible, there will be praise and blame, because we are relational beings, and everyone is different and wants different things. And so you can't please everyone. Neither can you displease everyone, which is a relief, I hope. There will always be some praise, even if you are tremendously blamed. There will always be some blame, even if you are tremendously praised. And then the last one, fame and disrepute, feels to me a little bit like kind of an amplification of the praise and blame one, right? The famous person, whether they're famous because they have, they've had lots of gain and not very much loss, so they're like the super wealthy. You get famous just for being wealthy. I don't know why. But there you go. People are interested in the very wealthy. Or you do something that gets a lot of praise. You're famous for some reason, good or bad. So there's fame. And, if you've spent any time following the lifestyles of the rich and famous, you know that disrepute comes, fast and furious with fame. So, it's basically impossible to be well known, and famous without, somebody, even a lot of people, being really cruel and critical. And people can be cruel and critical in horrendous ways. So praise and blame, fame and disrepute. I like the old term disrepute. I sent you all around the discourse that lays these out. They use the translation fame and disgrace, which is nice. Disgrace is but disrepute has a certain, punch to it. So you've got these 8 worldly winds, or 8 worldly conditions. And the natural question, is like, okay, it seems obvious that the first thing to do is to accept that these are true. What this means partly is that we have to confront, in any way we can find it in ourselves, the probably subtle addiction to, the 4 positive ones. Like, even if you're like, yes, I know that this is totally true, I get it. It still may well be that some part of you is like, yeah, but, I'm going to make as much gain, pleasure, praise, and fame happen as I can. And like, okay, maybe I'll get some of the other thing, but if I work hard, bootstrapping myself up, whatever privileges I've got, I'm going to try to get more gain, more pleasure, more praise, more fame in whatever way. And so it's worth practicing to feel into any way that in ourselves we are still deluded about this. Because it's easy to give these things lip service, like, yes, they come and go. But, to really look at your bank account and be like, all of this could dissolve in moments. right? Or to look at your friend circle and be like, all of these people will die. Or all of these people could become grumpy with me. Like, I could disappoint this group and suddenly, persona non grata. Like, I hope not. And that, that's partly what ethics and wise relationship and right speech and caring for our material things and for our relationships is about. But to really feel into like, oh, there's still addiction in my psyche, right? And so addiction is a way of saying that I'm grasping at one half of this dyad, pleasure, and just resisting the other, even though I know that it's true. And it's so natural to do so, right? I kind of can't help it. Our bodies are built to be, pleasure-liking, pain-fearing animals. It's not that it's wrong to do so, but it's not free. And the Buddha is proposing this thing that's pretty radical in relation to us being these pleasure-seeking animals, that we actually hack our metabolism almost and our neurology and our emotional system to say, like, I know that it's the most natural thing in the world to want pleasure and recoil from pain. Everyone from the parameciums up to us and the dolphins and beyond does this. But that's why we're miserable. That's why there's distress in the system. The Buddha says you're grasping at something that is fundamentally unreliable. And so the place the text goes with this is it goes directly to impermanence and unreliability. Because these things always fluctuate. Therefore, grasping at them is going to be both fruitless and painful. So if you want to be really free, stop. So that's the whole picture, right? If you can figure out how to stop, that's liberation, the Buddha says. You're done. You're free. Profound happiness and contentment arise from there. So that's hard. So let's talk about it a little more then. I'll keep going with the kind of addiction model, because it's familiar to some of us. It's familiar broadly in the culture. And we have a sense of like, oh, there's this thing that the heart, I'll call it the heart, mind, body, all one thing, does that is partly really physical, like there's just craving in the body. It's partly emotional. There's like strong feeling that gets wrapped up in the thing I'm craving. And it's partly mental. There's a kind of story that I need this in order to be well. All of that wraps up together to give rise to a state of being where there's a kind of fixation on something, right? A bunch of extremely rich people were, a wide range of rich were surveyed at one point, and they were asked, they would say what their net worth was at this moment, and they would be asked, how much would your net worth need to be for you to be really content, to know that you had enough? How much would you have to know that you had enough? And then they ran the numbers on everyone that answered the question. And almost across the board, everyone basically said, somewhere between 10 and 20% more than I have. So, and these were the very wealthy. So they were like, okay, I know I'm worth $5 million. I think if I just got to $5.5 million, that would be enough, right? Really? Really, man? Are you sure? Because that was true, like way up. Millions and millions. Just a little more. All the way down to like, okay, I'm pretty comfortable, but just a little more would be more comfortable. This is really baked into our being then. It actually doesn't have anything to do with the number. This is an addictive psychology. And before I go further in that direction, just to say, this is not a thesis about psychology and wealth that tracks down into poverty. Because once you get down to a certain level of survival function, it's actually not an addictive personality that's saying I need 10% more. There's actually like, yeah, there's paying your rent and buying food and having healthcare, and that's basic. And so once you get there, the psychology and actually the Buddha's teaching on this changes, right? So that means that for a lot of us in a place like the Bay Area, the psychology around, gain and loss, is a little bit, how do you say, fucked. Is that technical? I don't know. Apologies. I'm not supposed to curse as a teacher. In some circles, but I think this one is okay. I trust you guys. When the survival line is so high, like it's so expensive to live here, it's actually hard to know whether I'm craving, more gain and comfort and ease, or whether I actually just haven't hit a living wage yet. Even though I'm relatively comfortable compared to the rest of the world. So you want to keep that in mind, right? This doesn't mean that somehow you should, give up trying to survive in a really difficult place. The reflection here is all of these things are impermanent. They're unreliable. You can't pin them down. So how do you work with that as a psychology? What do we actually do? The core teaching points to letting go, right? Like, okay, so you practice being less fixated, less addicted to gain, pleasure, praise and fame, and more tolerant of loss and pain and blame and disrepute. So I'm working toward a kind of equanimity. But that's really hard, right? It's one thing to say like, okay, I'm trying to work on that. And then someone comes in with real blame. They're like, you did this thing and it wasn't so straight up. And, I don't know how you feel about that, but that really stings. I don't like that at all. And whatever equanimity I've come about in practice, mostly what happens in that moment is that I really don't like it, or I get sick. I'm actually a little bit sick right now. First time in a couple of years. Finally, my kid brought a cold home from school. And I'm like, wow, I've been in a bubble for a couple of years. So, but do I like it? I do not like it, right? So equanimity is hard to come by. It's a long practice. It's a long practice to mature into being the kind of person who could be like, yeah, this is painful, but I can relax a little bit into this. It's okay. It's really difficult to jump from the addictive mind into non-attachment. As if you can just like let go of the guardrails and be like, I'm cool with falling. Not so easy. What you need, and this is where I think addiction psychology really comes in, you have to actually substitute something for the addictive object. And, so what do you substitute for the objects of these various cravings? In a world where there's gain and loss, what do you do to be able to hold on to something? In a world where there's pleasure and pain, praise and blame, what do you hold on to? And because all of this stuff is so impermanent, you might say everything's impermanent. It's true. So what's a decent refuge? And so I'm using the word refuge on purpose because this is the main thing that the Buddha will suggest as a stepping stone to deep letting go. Right? If you can go all the way to deep letting go, bully for you, is excellent. Most of us need some support along the way. And that support is the triple gem in a very traditional sense. So this is, do you have some sense that being free or liberation is possible? That's the first gem of the Buddha, right? You're like, oh, it's actually possible to be happy even in a world where there's all this fluctuating stuff. The second gem is the Dhamma, so the teachings. Like, does it make sense to you that there's a path, that there's things you can practice where you can actually deal with this? If you accept that there's anything to be done and that these teachings might help, that's the Dhamma, that's the Dharma. And then the third is community, Sangha. that there's actually people that are working on this that can support you. All of these things are still impermanent, right? History tells us, and the Buddha understands this, that there's times in history where there's no Buddha, and that there's no Dhamma being taught, and there's no community of wise people to help you along. And it would be much harder to deal with the heart mind in a moment like that, when wisdom teachings aren't available, and wise community isn't available, and teachers aren't available. So even though these things, these triple gems, are impermanent and, fundamentally unreliable, in this moment we have them. They exist on the earth, in history, in our community. Here you are. The Gay Buddhist Fellowship is a fellowship. Fellowship means Sangha. This is one of the triple gems. The Buddhist part of Gay Buddhist Fellowship means the Buddha, and you can have lots of different relationships to this being of the Buddha or the teachings of the Dhamma. But what it proposes is that it can be a refuge that you can hold on to amid the changing storms of all these worldly conditions. You have to hold on to something. It's the guide rope, It's the golden thread that Theseus is hanging on to guide him out of the labyrinth. Otherwise, you're just lost in the maze of the mind. And at the middle of it, is a bull-headed monster who will tear you to shreds. That's, attachment, let's say. So you need something to hold on to. So the first thing is refuge. And again, interpret that however you like. But a very simple way would be, here you are coming together to study and practice. This groups like this, can be such a powerful support when you're trying to deal with, the changing winds. In the same way that, in a model, like in the recovery model, very classically, like just keep coming to meetings is in a certain way the primary, intervention. Like just keep coming. So you have something to hold on to. One more day, go to another meeting, meet with people, say your name, say what you're struggling with, hear what people are struggling with, and it helps, right? You come on Sunday morning, say your name, get together, it helps. So the first layer is what do you hold on to? And then you can maybe approach the deeper layer of how we deal with a world where things are impermanent and unreliable is letting go, is working on softening the grip in relation to this thing. When we think about letting go, like the teaching on the winds itself, in a certain way there's a layer that's obvious. Pleasure and pain come and go, gain and loss come and go. What it actually looks like to let go is complicated, And if we take this first one, gain and loss, again, as an example, when the Buddha taught this, he taught it in the context of having created a monastic sangha, a community, two communities really, of men and women, and bowing here always to the spectrum of gender, and that there's non-binary folks who in a binary system like that would have to choose where to go, and that's true currently in the monastic system, where there's pathways for folks who are anywhere on the wide spectrum of gender to turn for monastic practice. There's still suffering and oppression within the binary system there, as there is throughout patriarchy and heteronormativity. But the Buddha creates this community founded on radical simplicity. So you give up using money, you give up sexuality, which in that time really almost entirely meant family. So you're really stepping out of the norms of the family bond and the commercial bond. And you live in this protected, intentional community where all of your basic needs, and again, this comes down to what's a real intervention for poverty, where your basic needs are taken care of. And the basic needs are four in the Buddhist monastic system: food, shelter, medicine, and clothing. And moving into a community like this is said to be a strong and powerful support for non-attachment, right? How one of the ways to be relieved of anxiety around gain and loss is to not have gain and loss radically determine your survival, right? Like it's natural to be anxious about loss of income in a place like San Francisco, which is so tremendously expensive to live in. You should be anxious about, losing all your money when the market crashes or whatever it is, or losing a job in a place like San Francisco can be very, very stressful. And so please don't take the teaching on like, oh, we should just be unattached as some sort of fantasy of like, well, that would be nice to be unattached, but actually I have all these responsibilities. The Buddha understands from the get-go that it's actually very difficult to practice non-attachment with deep material responsibilities. And some of you will have relational responsibilities, right? You can't practice non-attachment to praise and blame when the person who's praising you or blaming you is your intimate partner with whom you have some kind of family structure and you're interwoven. And it matters what that person thinks of you, and it matters how you tend your relationship. It would be the height of it's the height of kind of emotional ship. It's the thing we call spiritual bypass. If your partner is like, why do you keep saying mean things to me? And you're like, maybe you should get over praise and blame, babe. Don't do that, right? That would be rude. And it would be appropriate for them to give you a smack and be like, yeah. I'll show you praise and blame, buddy. Non-attachment is the result of wisdom. It's not a thing that you can just bring in as a kind of get out of jail free card and be like, oh, suddenly I don't care about how much money is in the bank or what people think of me. Of course you care. It's appropriate to care. And so non-attachment in the context of lay life, first of all, is always in the context of our whole system and all the things that we have to be responsible for. And so partly this is just a practice puzzle for you. It's clear from the teachings that letting go in relation to these things that are constantly fluctuating is going to relieve anxiety on the system. And at the same time, that anxiety is not ungrounded for the most part. Sometimes it is. I'm tripping out on something that my person said. And the right thing to do is to go to them and be like, hey, babe, I'm tripping out because of this thing you said. And if they know me well, they're like, you're tripping out. I'm like, oh, great. Thank you. I just needed to be reassured that way. And sometimes they're like, I said that because I was upset or because you did this. You're in relationship process. It's okay. I think, we have to figure out how to live in the world that is like this. And so I want to hear some of your, methods and pathways with that. I'm going to suggest one general framework for how we roll with this, and then we'll go into some discussion. One of the frameworks that in the Buddha's teachings for lay people, so and if you are a monastic and you're here, welcome. It doesn't look like anyone here is from your names anyway, but don't know. For lay people, largely how the Buddha talks about wealth and pleasure, relationship, is in relation to the core virtue or practice, both, of generosity. So for lay people, it's actually very appropriate to pursue wealth, to become really wealthy, because the wealthy are able to support many other people, including monastics, but also including people in their community. And the purpose of wealth in the Buddhist system is to give it away. So I might understand like, oh, I was raised middle class. I have some white privilege, even though it's a little complicated there, but I've got some of that, and I'm making a decent income, if I am. what all of that means is that I do have some significant amount of pleasure that I enjoy in this world, and some bits of praise and fame. What to do with all that privilege, this really tracks into the conversation about privilege broadly, is that the thing you can do with privilege is that you can help people, right? If you're wealthy, you can help a lot of people. If you're ethical and wise enough to be getting a lot of praise and fame for good reasons, you can help people. You can really direct your resources toward care and well-being. And so generosity, I think, is in a way, along with refuge. Refuge is for yourself, right? I hold on to the teachings of the Dhamma as an anchor in the storm. The Buddha would literally say this. He would say, this is an island in the storm. And then for others, I turn the personal grasping at the positive side of all these winds, gain, pleasure, praise, fame. I turn my personal grasping at those into a kind of wholesome cultivation of those for the well-being of others. And of course, I'm going to notice my addictive patterns. I mean, I just really want the thing that tastes good or that feels good. It's okay. You bow to craving. That only gets uprooted in the very last moments of liberation, I'm going to finish with a little story of someone who was in the Buddha's family. I was teaching about this in a Sutta study class that I'm doing at Spirit Rock right now. So this story was on my mind. The Buddha goes back to teach his family. His clan builds a new community hall, and they invited him to come and give the first talk. And one of the people there is one of his cousins. A couple of his cousins have become monks already. This one hasn't. His name is Mahanama. Mahanama is a really dedicated student of the Dharma, loves the Dharma, has really practiced, has achieved bits of some freedom. He's a stream enterer, but he refuses to become a monk yet, and the reason is that he's still attached to sensual pleasures. So he's sort of our patron saint. Like, okay, I would be a renunciate, but actually I really like sensual pleasures. It's like, well, it's just true. I do. So, and in a very personal way, it's why I'm not still a monk. I became a monk for a short while, 20 some years ago. I had to leave being a monk because my mom was dying. I took care of my dad for a little while after that happened. And then I almost went back, except that on the brink of going back, like literally, I had let go of my house in the mission. Everything was packed up. I was waiting for the hot season in Burma to cool down a little bit. And I was going to go back for the rains. And then I met my person. Which is it going to be, right? A life of a renunciate, household life won out. Sensual pleasures won out, to be honest. I was like, oh, sexiness. I haven't had enough. So I dove back in. So Mahanama's like this. He can't give up sensual pleasures. And he says to the Buddha, like, why is it that I'm not content yet? And the Buddha says, you're still attached to sensual pleasures. And so it's just real. It's just real. We're in that spot, and whatever of these you're attached to, whichever one, you're still pursuing fame. God bless you. May you find what you want, But the key for lay people then is do it for not just myself, but also for others. Really bring in the quality of generosity. And that transforms actually all of the wins, the pursuit of the positive side of all the wins, into a much more wholesome and really relationally much more pleasurable activity, right? And so, there's nothing wrong with wealth. There's wrong with wealth ill spent and ill gotten. So our task is to become equanimous and less addicted in relation to the winds, to understand that they fluctuate all the time and they are out of our control, and that we have the refuge of the Dhamma and the teachings and the community of wise beings to help us, and that ultimately non-attachment is what will open the field to profound happiness. And that in the meantime, part of the work of dealing with the winds as lay people is to uplift generosity and really be in a wiser and more gracious relationship to the fluctuation of the winds that we find ourselves in. All right, so I'll pause there. Thanks for listening with such warmth. And we have a bit of time here for any questions, folks in the room or in other rooms, more spread out.
Thank you, Sean. Anyone in the room, or if you want to raise your hand or just speak up online, go for it.
Bob.
Go ahead, Bob.
Thank you so much. I mean, you got me thinking and feeling lots of things that I normally don't think or feel about. But it occurred to me when talking about seeking happiness, I was trying to think, in what ways do I seek happiness now? And at this stage in my life, I was thinking actually what I'm seeking is being less unhappy. And I'm wondering whether I'm just playing games with myself with words and the two are the same thing.
I don't know that it matters. I'm into seeking happiness, and I'm into seeking less unhappiness. But from the sense that we get in the teachings of the Buddha is that unhappiness is the result of the presence of a certain thing in the heart, which is craving or this addictive sense. And that when that goes away or is uprooted or we grow out of it in whatever way, the thing that remains is automatically happiness. That there's not, there's the happiness of getting something like, a big, like a gift or a position or a relationship or something. So there's a happiness of acquisition, but there's a happiness that maybe tracks along the lines of like contentment or bliss. That's more like the happiness of the absence of something. The Buddha says a really interesting thing to Mahanama, who still is really fond of sense pleasures. He says, the only way to truly be free of the desire for sense pleasures is to have something better to replace it with. And he says, and he talks about himself, he says, until I had tasted the pleasure that was beyond the senses, I did not claim to have gone beyond sense pleasures. So essentially, there's a pleasure in practice. And the Buddha is very specifically talking about the pleasure in meditation. He's talking about deep states of contented ease, concentrated states in the heart mind, where there's not actually a sensory happiness. He's not getting something, but he's so fully taken away the grasping that when the mind naturally settles and isn't grasping, spontaneously an extraordinarily sweet, easeful states begin to arise. And so I think the Buddha is really talking about the subtractive kind of happiness here, what you're calling like the absence of unhappiness, right? Less unhappy. I'll take it. That sounds great. Sometimes there's also a kind of additive happiness, like, I got less unhappy, but then I also, maybe that helped me to be more generous in a relationship. And and then I was praised by my sweetheart or something. They're like, oh, you seem so radiant today. And cute. And I'm like, I like that. I like both of those things, And so there's a kind of additive happiness. I got a sensory pleasure called praise. I'll take it. But deeper than that, because, 10 minutes later, they might be like, and we should talk about some other things, praise and blame, like swings fast. But deeper than that is that first pleasure of like, oh, I cut back on craving. I was able to like let go somehow. And then there's a very sweet just contentment that's there. So maybe that's a helpful way to think about these two kinds of results of practice, two kinds of happiness that we might practice.
Your use of the word contentment really focused me. I think that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Looking for contentment, which is not specifically happiness.
That's right. Yeah. And in a certain way, it's more reliable. When contentment gets deep, it's pretty close to equanimity and liberation. Right? So it's really, really a positive quality to cultivate. Thank you for bringing head forward, Bob. Jeff, please.
Hi, thank you for a great talk. I love the 8 worldly winds. I have a little printout of it, put it in my medicine cabinet, so I see it.
Good place for it.
Yeah, right. But I'm really struck today by what we're talking about is the absence or relinquishment of things, and what happiness or contentment is not. And I know the ineffable is unspeakable, and yet it makes me more. I feel like I have a deep meditation practice and things, but there's talking about the undying or the deathless.
Yeah.
And that absence of unhappiness, I guess. It makes it more foreground in a way to talk about, the absence of it.
Yeah.
But any thoughts about that?
I'm going to go, because you mentioned, having a deep meditation practice. And if we're talking about this kind of additive or subtractive approach to things, this word you're using, the beautiful word from the text, relinquishment, the deep, pleasurable states of meditation are so healthy. There's a way that it's almost like I can't overstate it, partly because for many of us in contemporary urban Buddhist circles, these states are not easy to come by, and we might kind of give them lip service, like, oh yeah, I wish I could do that, but I can't, so I'm working on kind of basic non-attachment. But the Buddha really will say it's very difficult to give up attachment until you know what's better on the other side. If I don't know what's better on the other side of attachment, I can will myself into it. It's a little bit like if I have a long history with alcohol, and I totally get it. People say sobriety is better, and I sort of believe them even, right? But I don't know what it tastes like, and so it's it's hard to maintain, right? Especially because the whole first period of trying to attain sobriety for many folks is characterized primarily by will. Like, well, it's not actually that pleasant, and I just have to sort of keep my hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel. That you can only maintain that for a little while, because the will gets tired. The mind will just get exhausted, and so you need good conditions to maintain that. And the Buddha knows that, and he's telling Mahanama that. He says, you can't get over sensual pleasures by force of will. And so in deep meditation, what the invitation is that there's a subtractive process where you recover from the hindrances bit by bit. You recover from distraction and the tendency toward fantasy and regret and proliferation bit by bit. This is actually a path that you can't do by force of will. You actually just have to relax. It's really relaxation response for a good bit there. And the thing that I want more of us to understand as contemporary practitioners is that the thing that we're going for is pleasure. That there's a profound pleasure that's not just kind of empty sort of baby contentment, like, okay, I'm kind of getting a little bit better at having the mind be a little bit quiet, and it's okay, it's kind of peaceful, I kind of like it. That's good, please do that. But that there's depths of profound, I'll say even like orgasmically overwhelming pleasure that happen as the mind gets quieter and quieter and the heart gets more and more spacious and relaxed. And it's these pleasures, the blisses of deep meditation, that the Buddha says, these are actually the things that will substitute for sensual pleasure. It's and by the way, for monastics, right, it's pretty much the only way to not suffer within a life of, celibacy, is you have to have something better. And the better comes in meditation, partly. And so even if we're not anywhere near, orgasmic samadhi and, rapturous blisses flooding the body, that's cool, no problem. It's, I don't approach those states very easily myself. But any little bit. And so then the instruction here really is, when you're meditating and there's a little bit of quiet, there's a little bit of space between the obsessive thoughts, there's a little bit of sweetness that arises. Don't just be like, that's a byproduct and I keep trying to get quieter, but take that in, take the pleasure in, and really enjoy it. Really enjoy it. It's like you're sober and you're hanging out with your friend and you're like, yeah, it's okay being sober. And your friend's like, no, you don't get it. Really feel it. Feel what it's like to be not affected by the substance. Taste the world around you. Really get it, how good it is. And then your task is really to take it in sensually, to be like, oh, the mind, heart, when it's quiet, is so sweet. And that there's a bliss in there. And it's, for a lot of us, it's really in the background because there's a lot of trauma, and that's okay. But find it. And that thing becomes the key to the unraveling of all the attachments. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the pathway forward. And you can do this whole thing with a passionate, feeling for pleasure. Like that's, as long as you're really attuned to subtle pleasure that the Buddha is talking. And, the pleasure of being together in the fellowship. Oh, we're here talking about Dhamma. We're acting ethically. We're talking kindly to each other. We're giving tips for being free in this world. Learn to become like an aesthete for the pleasure of the wholesome. Like, oh, this is wholesome and it's not boring. Oh, this is great. These people are great. Even the ones that are annoying are great because we're here doing this thing. And that there's a sweetness to that. And so you can follow that line of pleasure for a good long ways there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, we need to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but we do have a question in the chat. Once experienced, can one get addicted to this unworldly pleasure? And Samuel has his hand up. Maybe we could get 2 questions and 1 answer.
Right on. Hi, Charles Lee. Good to see you again. I want to give a very short answer to the can one get addicted to unworldly pleasure? And I'm going to contradict some teachers out there. I'm just going to say no, you cannot. And that is because, first of all, it's wholesome. So it's actually fine to get really into it for years. Get good at it. Get really good at this unworldly pleasure because it's good for you. It doesn't hurt anybody. It's not a waste of your time. And eventually, the deeper you go into it, the aspects of it where there's still attachment and grasping will show themselves, right? Like, if you get orgasmic pleasure in meditation, sustain it for an hour. Go for it. Do it. Because eventually your body will be like, okay, is there anything else? Because this is a little intense. So you can't get addicted to it because addiction is fundamentally unwholesome. And the pleasure of the mind at ease is fundamentally wholesome. Samuel, let me see if I can do it quickly and then we'll dedicate merit.
Yeah, so something that I'm working with is, I don't know if you're familiar with the late John Welwood. He had a wonderful article called Holy Longing, Devotion, and the Genuine Heart of Sadness. So
yeah,
I'm very kind of addicted to attachment or to, sexual, sensual pleasure is so huge to me. Yeah. And not really getting that, always getting frustrated, but it's really helpful to me to really tune into the longing,
Yeah.
And the longing that is actually what we want as ourselves, or what in our connection to true nature, the beloved, as I understand it from my practice. So,
yes.
You have anything to say about that?
Lots, but in brief, bowing to it, totally a real and true part of practice. The hinge is I think for me anyway, the hinge is to not let the idea or story or image that what I'm longing for is the beloved or true nature or myself, to not let that become a way to justify unwholesome longing. In other words, am I really just grasping for, a certain kind of physical contact or emotional contact? And then I'm telling myself something that is fundamentally true, that this is longing for the divine or longing for the beloved. But the fundamental true message gets drowned out by the intensity of the more of the longing for the thing that's actually impermanent. So like, yes, I'm longing for the beloved, but am I spending all my time looking for a person or people? It's not that it's wrong to look for people, but we have to understand that if what I'm seeking is, in a very tangible sense, this thing that's impermanent, then that's going to be unreliable. The divine beloved is permanent. That's
right.
Reliable.
Yeah.
But if I don't let that teaching undercut the work of liberation, that teaching should support the work of liberation, so that when the beloved comes along as a physical person, blessed be. When the beloved as a physical person is not available, blessed be.
Yeah.
Because if the attachment is still to the thing that's in the worldly winds, there's going to be suffering, even if that attachment is fundamentally, our divine nature seeking contact with the divine. That's true. But it's cold comfort, at 1 a.m. when I'm lonely.
Right.
And so when that's the case, I actually have to confront the truth of being lonely or the truth of wanting and be like, no amount of prayer or scripture will undo this. I actually have to meet the suffering for what it is, which is also divine,
Yeah, but I also think the paradox is actually being in that suffering that then opens up to a real fullness of the heart. It's
Absolutely. But it has to be met fully.
Right.
Again, don't let the narrative distract you from the hurt.
Right. No, you got to be in the felt sense.
you gotta feel it. You gotta be in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Good question to seal us off.
Thank you so much. And now is our time to end the discussion and ask for announcements. So we have a host here today.
I'm the host today, so please stay and enjoy the fellowship of the Sangha. We have some vegan treats available. There's hot water for tea. Leave your cup in the sink if you have tea, and I'll take care of them. I'll be coming around with the Dana bowl. Dana is the Pali word for generosity, and this is the way we support the Sangha, support the activities of the Sangha, primarily the rent for this beautiful place and the newsletter that we use to help spread the Dharma and share the wisdom of these Dharma talks with people who aren't able to experience them in person. So, and I guess, I don't know, say people still gather at the front door around 12:30 to go to lunch. Keep an eye out for that. And I guess that's it.
Okay. And speaking of which, if you're interested there's an art show in the Noe Valley Town Center this afternoon, and there's also the Castro Street Fair. So if anybody wants to gather and go to those fun things, there it is. Let's see. I sent out, the board sent out a link to a Google form a week or so ago asking for input on what kind of, Michael, can you speak eloquently to this?
Just in order to sort of stimulate community and raise the sort of the Sangha profile, if folks want to begin to think about participating in some kind of social action, either within the group or within this group in conjunction or partnership with other groups. We'd like your feedback on that, and if we get a substantial number of people who are interested, we'll try and identify some opportunities.
Yeah. So just if you click on the link to the form that you received, you'll see just 2 quick questions to answer. So if you wouldn't mind doing that. And then if you didn't receive that, then please email Joe Castrovinci about joining or being on our Google listserv. And let's see, I forgot to see who's next week. Oops.
Open discussion.
Oh, it's open discussion. Okay, so next week is open discussion. You'll be in breakout rooms on Zoom, and we'll be in small groups in the room. Any other announcements? Any online? Okay, then, Sean, do you have a dedication of merit, or would you like us to use our traditional one?
I'm happy to hear your traditional one. It's beautiful. So
okay.
I'll just thank everybody, and really it's lovely to be here with you.
Okay, well, we'll get in a circle here. Cass, do you remember it? Okay.
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow, and may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Hey, Sean, do you have time for a quick comment?
I do.
I didn't hear from Matthew. I don't know if he was in the physical room or not, but he often says, I really like the way he says it, that he uses, when he's in distress, he uses the 8 worldly winds and the 5 hindrances to help diagnose what's going on. And then he turns, for the prescription, he looks to the Brahma Viharas.
Yeah.
And so I really like that sort of interplay. And I really like the fact that you address the 8 worldly winds, because to me, they're sort of the glossary to the second noble truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
They help us, they bring the second noble truth to life instead of just, oh, that's nice. Because until we really accept that there is suffering and we know it deeply, we're not interested in the prescription of the 3rd and 4th noble truths.
Right.
Yeah.
It's such a good list to be like, I'm out of sorts. I can tell that there's some grasping or some fixation happening. What's going on?
Yeah.
And then to be like, oh yeah, it's relational. Like, oh, it's, I was wanting a different kind of praise or a different, I was wanting to hear something, or I heard something I didn't like it, or,
Yeah.
It's beautifully diagnostic. And, the Brahma Viharas as a prescription, it tracks along with generosity, as the kind of underlying, right? Because the Brahma Viharas are meant to be universal, they cut through preference. You send loving kindness to yourself and everybody, whether you like them or not, and compassion for everybody, whether you like it or not. And so they ride on a kind of generosity of spirit.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think that's just getting out of the self-fixation, I think is the main thing for the worldly winds, because it's always like there's gain and loss, but that's happening everywhere to everybody. So the thing that I'm upset about generally is like gain and loss to me or my people or the people I identify with, so I didn't speak to it, but deep in all of the reflections on impermanence, and then the prescription being some kind of non-attachment or letting go, the implication in that is that one of the main things to be let go of is individual identity, right? It's the separate self. And so generosity of spirit just tracks toward that as, it's like, oh.
Yeah, it transcends me and mine.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can get out of me and mine, what's gain and loss?
Right?
Right? You can go Newtonian and be like, energy is neither created nor destroyed.
Right.
So, things just fluctuate.
Yeah.
And
thanks for your insights.
Participate in that. You're welcome. Yeah, good to see you. And thank you, Chris, for suggesting the topic. Pleasure.
Great. Thanks so much, Sean. It was a great talk. Great.
Awesome.
Take care.
We'll see you all again. Take good care.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.